to jump in and say that you might remember that this time last year, we launched our first actionable insights report, which is where we ask our in-market experts, a couple of external research organizations, and our service provider network to give us their take on the opportunities and challenges that they're seeing in their markets or their areas of expertise for the next 12 to 18 months. But more importantly, not just talking about the trends and the issues, but their tips for success, to how you can make the most of the opportunities and overcome the challenges. And last year, we only made the report available to Pro and Premium members. But actually, we felt that the content was so valuable that we should give everyone an opportunity to benefit from all the wisdom in the network. So this year, you'll all be getting a copy, which is hopefully good news. And in terms of the highlights, just a couple of the headlines which I pulled out, which I thought were quite interesting, that IGD, who you might remember if you came to the Awards and Network Forum in December, gave a really good presentation on kind of retail trends, and they've echoed some of those trends in their contribution. And their take is really that although retailers have got the inflationary background, and that's very much their focus in terms of where they put their energies, health and wellness, sustainability and digitization are still very much there, maybe in a more subtle way, but all retailers are feeling the pressure to develop in those areas and improve, probably in a more sort of subtle and incremental way than perhaps the sort of the shouty way that they've been doing it up until now. Also within retail, the battle for consumers' attention is polarizing, or continues to polarize, between private label on the one hand and premiumization on the other hand. And that's very much borne out in some of our country experts to see, they're kind of seeing the same thing happening in market, which is always great when trends that a research company spots are echoed by people who are out there in market doing the doing. In terms of markets, France, I thought, was quite interesting in that, I think we tend to think about the French as relatively healthy eaters, and health and wellness is very much at a trend, a growing trend there. But the strongest growth in terms of category sales is coming from very unhealthy categories like crisps, cereal bars, and dehydrated ready meals, which is a bit of a funny one. In the USA and in Germany, consumers are very much influenced and making purchasing decisions based on the source of products, ingredients, and the dietary claims. And in Germany, they're looking for those sort of clear on-pack declarations and supply chain transparency. So they are looking at pack, but they also want to know what's going on behind the scenes in terms of sources of ingredients and across the whole supply chain. And then Mark will come on to Australia shortly. I think I picked out from what you were saying, Mark, that for UK exporters, although the top two multiple retailers dominate, there is still room to go down the independent route, which takes up quite a large chunk of retail sales. So perhaps we can chat about that in a minute. In terms of halal and food and drink imports into the OIC member states, which is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, I didn't know this till I looked it up, but there are 57 member states, of which 48 are predominantly Muslim. And growth to those member states is expected to surge by nearly 8% over the next 5 years, which will open up a lot more opportunities for halal products, particularly in Saudi, Turkey, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And then finally, several of our contributors, both or mainly our sort of export operations companies point to the UK joining the CPTPP group of countries as opening up opportunities, and I think that links in nicely to what Max will have to say about free trade agreements, and perhaps some of the stuff that you witnessed yesterday, John, at the event that you went to. So anyway, just on the report, we'll be publishing it next week so that you can look at not just those trends that I've highlighted, but probably more importantly, the impacts and the recommendations that all our experts are making, so that you can see how they apply to your business. And if you're a premium member and you want to discuss the report in more detail and the impacts and how they might affect your export planning and strategy for this year, just drop me an email and we can set up a call with you and your team. So that's the highlights of the report, which will be coming out soon, John. Oh, I think you're still on mute. There we
Thanks,
go.
Nicola. Has anybody any questions for Nicola at the moment? No hands raised? Well,
you might have once you've read it. I think it's about 40 pages of content, so a bit of light reading. But yeah, if you've got any questions once you've had a peruse, let me know.
Well, I went yesterday to a joint Scotland Food and Drink DBT afternoon on well, they called it their Australia and New Zealand show. I found it very interesting, and both the native Australians and the UK is tasked with promoting the free trade area were highlighting the opportunities that they saw. So I'd like to hand over to Mark Field from Pro Consulting, who's going to give us some of his insight into the markets in Australasia. So thanks, Mark. Over to you.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Nicola, for the introduction there. It's great to get an opportunity to update, I guess, our colleagues on the call this morning. So I've just arrived back in the UK, been back in the UK, I think, for 2 weeks, having spent nearly a month back in Australia. And I think, that was my first significant time back this year. So I haven't been out of the market for probably 6 weeks. I had a great opportunity to compare what was happening in the UK retail sector, but then to go back and look at it with fresh eyes in Australia. And I think there were some real significant differences and changes that I saw in the market. So I'd like to break this short session down into 2 pieces, if that's all right. Firstly, to share my observations on the Australian market as we've seen, over the last few months, or the starting months of this year, I should say. And then I was originally expecting to talk after Max, so I'd like to just sort of share my insights onto the FDF report that's been shared and try and cover off both in one go if I can. So within the retail market in Australia, what have we seen recently? We've seen the 2 major retailers that account for around 65% of the grocery spend, both report profits, both making healthy profits, and both come under immense pressure from the Australian government and industry in cases around potential profiteering. So what does that really mean? It means that the government's organised the ACCC, who is obviously one of the key regulators in the Australian market, to do a 12-month review of grocery codes of practice and interactions with retailers. So we're seeing some really interesting dynamics in that space. We're seeing large parts of the industry coming out saying, no, we're very happy with how we're being dealt with. But we're also seeing, as you'd expect, the other scale where people are coming forward, giving examples of where behaviours probably haven't been best aligned with the code and the expectations. So ultimately, why is that important to us if we're looking at the Australian market? I think it means everyone is really focused on doing the right thing and operating as quickly and as professionally as they can do. So, there's those dynamics to be aware of in the market for sure, which is incredibly interesting. I think my observation is that food inflation is starting to slow. Fresh produce has definitely started to slow down. Protein has started to slow. That's not yet coming through into canned goods and ready meals. So, they keep saying it's going to come. But at the moment, we're not seeing that reflected in there. I think overall, having bought food over there for nearly a month, I think retail food is still very expensive. Even when you look at the increase in promotional activity, I think Australian consumers at the lower end of the income bracket are finding things incredibly tight. things that you would have bought, last year for maybe $5 are definitely costing you between 8 and 10 now. So there's your savoury snacks, there's your unhealthy biscuits and your treats. You can definitely see the price increase into that. As a non-food related example, Canada deodorant on offer at the moment, $7.50 for some brands. So that market's really changing, and I think consumers are very cautious, and they're definitely trying to shop their promotional activities. Which leads me into promotional activities at the moment. The retailers are trying everything at the moment. So we're seeing, a straight discount off the ticket price. We're seeing everyday low price mechanisms. We're seeing buy one, get one half price coming back in. An example, and I'm not sure whether there's any colleagues from there on the call, but, recently Mondelez with the chocolate are now doing 3 bars of chocolate discounted for $15. So instead of $7 a bar, it's now buy 3 and get 3 for 15. It goes through your mind, who really wants to buy 3 bars of chocolate? A family with 2 girls here, that's never a great idea. Thanks, Nicola. But that marketing concept that says when things are really tight, where's the logic that says consumers are going to buy 3 of an impulse snack at that price point? So, I think the message there is everyone's trying something now to be different on the shelf. I did a walk the store exercise recently while I was over there. A category of 96 products, 60 of them were on some form of promotional activity. So from a consumer lens perspective, very hard to shop because all you're seeing is the price off tickets. From a store operational perspective, compliance is incredibly challenging. And from a supply chain perspective, when there's that much competition in the category, how do you really predict what your sales are going to be like? So I think the key message is everyone's trying something to create differentiation and value in the market. Nicola's touched on the independent sector there, which I keep saying is about 18% of the market. From work I've been doing in the UK recently, I think there's a significant comparison to be made between the farm shop sector in the UK and the independent sector in Australia. Lots of comparisons there, lots of similarities between the customer and the customer expectation between that sector. And the reason I mention that on today's call is that the single largest supplier into that, which is Metcash, has recently acquired the second largest food distributor in Australia. So suddenly their buying power changed. Not only are they looking at increasing their strength there into that independent sector, which I say is around 18% of the market, but they've suddenly then got a far greater buying power to go into that food service sector, which generally is also looking for that point of difference and that premium product to sit into their HoReCa or cafe trade. So I think that will be an interesting dynamic as they start to absorb the business and start to find out some of the opportunities. One of the things that has been in the press this week, and hopefully I'm not taking too much time, is that if you buy into food service and if you buy into retail, you get 2 very different pricing models. So the fact now that Metcash will have access to both pricing models, they will be able to go for the cheaper model, should give them a real different should give them a real point of difference in the market. So super excited to see how that plays out over the next 12 months. And I think it will start to drive a bit more competition into that sector, because whilst Metcash are not supplying any more supermarkets, it's still going to be around that 18%. Suddenly their buying power becomes a bit more competitive. And I think it becomes a bit more attractive to UK food and drink players that are looking in there and don't necessarily want to go for Coles or Woolworths at the beginning because of the value play that we know is the main focus there. Which brings me on then to private label. And I think, I hope I'm consistent when I talk through these sessions, that I think branded supply opportunities in Australia are still significant. But I would really encourage a number of you to think about private label opportunities because of the lack of competition in Australia when it comes to world-class manufacturing. And if you're supplying a Tesco's or Sainsbury's here with private label product, your innovation capability is going to be, in many cases, superior to what's available in Australia. So the ability to use turnkey innovation and take products that are proven in other markets into the Australian market gives you a point of difference, and it obviously gives you a value play in this market. So I'd encourage you to keep that on your radar as you look at strategic access into that market. But I think just on the private label, what we have seen was really quite impressive, and I shared a link through the FDA website recently, is that both retailers have rebranded their value offer. As we've seen in the UK, the retailers there have rebranded it. It's, I think you're happier to put it into your basket because you don't feel you're compromising. It looks more akin to what would have been the mid-tier food in the old language. But we've seen both retailers now take that adoption, reinvest in the value play, which suggests that they really see the opportunity there for products, for customers, but also for suppliers. And Coles only last week announced that they've done a rebrand of their premium offer because they also see that's important. And the signs I take from that, understanding the market and spending time there, is there's customer growth in both areas. Many people will just talk about the value play, but actually if you can deliver a compelling, great quality, great value offer at the premium end, yeah, what we are seeing is more consumers buying product in the supermarket because it's cheaper than taking your family out. So, we're seeing a growth in premium meats, a growth in premium wines, a growth in gourmet preserves, as an example, sauces, condiments, etc. Because people are spending more now, so they have that better home experience, because it's still significantly cheaper than going out into the restaurants as they were before. So I think it's really interesting there that if you're a more of a quality brand, I think there's an opportunity there for branded and private label growth, where probably the value play is a bit more challenging because of the cost targets they will be looking for. Yeah. And I think, just as Nicola said there, I think the growth in the market really continues to be around anything that's health and wellness related, not necessarily sitting within the health aisle in the supermarkets. The retailers there have made a strategy, or a strategic decision, I should say, where they're putting the healthier options next to the traditional options. Because if you're buying cereal, you're looking to buy cereal in the cereal aisle, not walk the health aisle and then go and walk the grocery aisle. So we're seeing that change in where products are located, which I think is good for consumers and good for businesses. And we're also seeing there what I class as food plus. So how do you take a food and make a food a carrier and put something into the food that's better for you from a wellness perspective? So that continues to be an area of innovation that's really exciting to watch. And I think one of my key reasons for being up in the UK at the minute is obviously IFE, which is just over a week's time. Delighted to get a chance to talk through some of the FDA panels that are there. But also, I think we've talked a little bit here about the opportunity for UK businesses going into Australia. I think, as John alluded to, there's at least 60 companies that are over here now waiting to be super competitive at IFE next week. So I think the opportunities between Australia and the UK are there, but it's definitely coming from both sides. All right, Nicola, I think that was everything on my list, John.
Right, thanks very much, Mark. Anybody any questions for Mark at the moment? Nobody waving their hands?
I just want, can I ask Mark just about Metcash for people who are interested in supplying independents? Do Metcash import directly? So if I'm in the UK and wanted to supply Metcash, do they deal direct with foreign brands?
Yes, they are importing. Yeah, and they're also working across the distribution of network. So, will that change moving forward? I think it's an area that's probably under review. But at the moment, the model is flexible and it's working in both cases. So it's not unusual to be on a buying trip and see somebody from Metcash there. But it's also not unusual to be on a buying trip and see a distributor there that's supplying, a wide range of portfolios into products. So I think it's really about understanding which category do we want to target, and then spending time to understand the insights from a store perspective and say, what's the competitive landscape? What's my reason to win? What's my USP? And is it the right market for me? And then taking that same lens and looking back and saying, okay, if I want to supply into the independent sector, what's the most appropriate channel for me to do it? Do I do it into a distributor and let the distributor take the majority of the benefits because that's where they're established? Do I look for someone that's going to partner with me and represent my business in that market? I think I think it's two key strategic questions to understand how to supply Metcash properly. I think that the key difference between supplying into the Metcash model and the Coles or Woolworths model is that the stores get the opportunity to list the products, but the stores get the opportunity. Whereas with a major retailer, you work the planograms and you say, this is what the category is going to look like. Those products are going to be there. So there's got to be that link through that says, yes, great, we've got listed with Metcash as the example. Now, what's the incentive for the store managers to bring my product into the store? And how do I get them inspired about my products? So, it's a slightly different model. And I think that's where a distributor can add value, particularly those that have the sales team on the ground and are in the store to make sure you've got your stock density right and you've got your product placement where it should be and so on and so forth. But it's a very successful model for a lot of businesses. And, as I was saying earlier, spending time around the farm shops here, which is super impressive at the minute down in the West Country. I think there's lots of comparisons I would draw between those two markets and say if you're really successful in the farm shops, then your product should fit really well into the independent sector in Australia. In many cases, as long as you can make the numbers fit, as long as you can make the numbers fit, but also as long as you can have that right supply chain that's going to do your product and your brand justice. I think as Stephen said the other week on a call about the US, I think Australia is the same, where you've also got to look at it and say, are you prepared to invest in the brand and what does that look like? The days of just pushing a brand in and thinking it's going to resonate with consumers have dropped significantly. And I think there is that requirement now through your own marketing activity, but also through marketing dollars with that retailer now to invest in building a brand. But I think the market is receptive to it.
Yeah, good.
Well, I'd like to say to everybody else on the call, if you're at all interested in the Australian market, Mark has told us more in just over 10 minutes this morning about the real market opportunities in Australia. 2.5 hours of listening to public sector people speaking yesterday afternoon. So I think you should seize the opportunity and get your hands up and ask questions of Mark.
That's very kind, John. Thank you.
I've not prompted any hands going up.
No,
Is
are you
everybody
all
asleep this
supplying
morning?
Australia or looking at it as a potential market? Is anybody already working in Australia? You're all hiding this morning. No one's got their cameras on, which is
They are. Now Nicola, we've got a few clients that are on the call that are looking at Australia, and there's some very successful brands in Australia as well that are coming out of the UK. You walk down that international aisle, and the international aisle is beginning to get more footage from where it used to be. But also you walk down the main confectionery aisles and some of the other aisles, there's products that we could go and buy in Sainsbury's and Tesco's that are doing very well, I would say, in Australia, and are not seen as being an international brand. They're just seen as being a great quality brand in the category that they play. So I think there's loads of positivity in there. And I think at the moment, going back to Max's presentation, I think the reason that we're not seeing the growth at the moment is because it takes time. If you go and talk to a major retailer today, you're probably looking at 9 to 12 months before that range review comes round. And I think that's with the FTA being ratified in May of last year. I'd expect there to be that lag phase, which I think, we're just coming towards the end of. And I think we'll see that real lift now as the hard work starts to pay dividends for those companies that are ahead and have engaged in the Australian market. And, for those that are thinking about it now, I think if you set an aspiration of having product in market in 9 to 12 months, I think that's realistic, to do it profitably. You could obviously fly something in and drop it with a distributor, but I think that's a very short-term play.
Yeah, I think I would. Yeah, if you look at other markets, I think that's if you're doing much between 9 and 12 months, that's really good going. But like you said, all your advice about thinking about your strategy and how much you're prepared to invest is all sound advice. So yeah, thanks.
I think it's becoming so much more competitive now, and I think what we are seeing is organizations and businesses invest in market insights and capability because you only get one chance to make a first impression. So as some of you would have seen on social media, we've got a trade mission that's coming over next weekend for IFE. They've invested in building capability for 20 suppliers that are coming over. Just like my understanding is that the Australians have coming up to the UK for IFE as well, because they know that they've got to raise their game. Having a great product on itself isn't enough. It's about coming over and giving that perception that you're established here and the market as well as your competition. So, whilst I think the opportunities are strong, I think the tickets to play are becoming more competitive, and I think we've all got to work harder to connect our products as solutions for customers and help category managers understand how that fits into the category.
Yeah, absolutely, and just by having an FTA, that's not going to happen automatically. It doesn't. It might smooth the path, but it's the workload is still the same.
Yeah, it's enabler for sure. It's not our reason to win. It's enabler to give us access into those markets. But I think the hard work has really started now, and it's great to see a number of companies looking at that, whether they're looking to go into Australia or whether they're looking to come up into the UK.
Les, one for you. one of the questions that came up yesterday afternoon, because they were mainly small producers, was is there groupage are there groupage available services available to go into Australia and New Zealand? You're on mute, Les.
Yeah, I'm all good now. Most people prefer me on mute. Anyway, so we had a conversation with an organization called Seafrigo. Now, they'd provided groupage services prior to Brexit from France to various locations. Obviously, Brexit happened, this, that, and the other. And they've now moved, they've got like a small office there in the UK. So we've been working with them, chatting with them about potential partnerships and this, that, and the other, to try and see if we can provide groupage solutions. Now, the only markets that they're looking at this moment are the Middle East and North America. So what I think I've mentioned to either Nicola or Sandra a little while ago that, you know, should I maybe come up with some sort of like a tick list? You know, if you're looking for groupage operations to specific regions, might it be an idea for the FDEA to say, okay, listen, we've got a number of different logistics specialists who may be able to help. Which markets are of most interest to you? You've got obviously an industry expert there from Australia, but there's other regions as well. But in order to, we can't put one pallet of frozen ice cream in a container and ship it off because you'd lose a couple of £1,000. But if you've got compatible products at the same temperature, then maybe we can do something about it. But it requires probably the FDA to have like a little bit of a questionnaire. You know, let's use Australia as an example to say, okay, are you looking to export to Australia? If so, would you be willing to like send one pallet? That could be a trial pallet because you've got to get it into a temperature control warehouse. You've got to make sure all the documentation is correct, and then you've got to obviously get it out there. Who's collecting? Have we got a facility out there who specializes in groupage distribution? So there's an awful lot involved to put something like this together. We can make it. We can certainly investigate it. But what I'm saying is we would need the FDA to really help us because we haven't got sufficient customers to put a groupage box together for Australia. Otherwise, we would have already done so.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Les. But because I think that the smaller producers particularly want to know, are they able to get their sort of volumes into such a distant market without using very expensive air freight. So I think a groupage solution is the sort of thing that would attract the smaller producers to really approach the Australian market much more seriously. Because at the moment, I think there's too far away, too difficult. When we've heard from Mark, there are real opportunities there. That was the message that I got yesterday afternoon from the public sector guys. You know, there are opportunities. British products are welcome there, and getting the product there, unless you're talking about full containers, is going to be an issue.
Yeah, well, as I say, if I think in order for this to work, it needs to be like a collaborative effort.
Yes,
because we just simply we haven't got the breadth of customer base that all want to go to Australia. But as a collaborative, then maybe it's something we can talk about because you know, you don't always have to make a profit. And what I mean by that is a company, for example, might send a whole pallet as a sample, so that the volume, the value of that pallet has been kind of written off. And what I'm saying is, we could, if we broke even on a container sort of option, then you know you've got to dip your toe in the water sometimes. We'd be prepared to do that, but we'd need, I think, customers of the FDA and members of the FDA to actually maybe work together through you to say, okay, who's looking and what are the volumes that we're talking about?
Right. Okay. Thank you. I think that's a good suggestion. And if we do get members who are wanting us to assist them, then yeah, we will be in touch, I'm sure.
Radio.
And try and pull something together collectively, because there's no point having a market wanting our product if we're stuck for means of getting it there, when there's bound to be a solution, even if it's got to go through France. I mean, we know that a lot of cheese goes into other markets. It doesn't. It's not shipped from the UK. It goes to the Havre first. So you know, there might be that sort of solution to getting products to Australia.
Yeah, we've got the resources to help. It's just that we haven't got the volume.
Right. Now we're waiting for Max.
Sorry, it's Shirley here. Sorry to cut you, John.
Thanks,
Les,
Shirley.
I have a question for you because I'm a soft drink supplier based here in London and a manufacturer in the UK. I wanted to understand the labelling requirements. Do you know about the labelling for Australia, and is it similar to the UK, the regulations, etc.? And how that would work, because if you're looking at doing something where you can get a group of like-minded people together to create a palette to send down and do something specific, then is there somebody that we could speak to with regards to labelling for the Australian market, so we understand what's involved there?
Yes, we can find out what are the particular requirements. You know, we know we've got people who are shipping regularly. We can get help, but the point that the Australian representatives were making yesterday was that their customs clearance is pretty straightforward compared with some countries. That, you know, they speak the same language, sort of. They can read English, and so you know, there shouldn't be too many difficulties in getting the product through customers. So I'm sure we can check on well, you can check on particular Australian requirements if you want. We could use one of our associate members would do it for you, and just apply the regulations to your particular label and say whether it meets their requirements or not.
Yeah, so we can Shirley, we can connect you to Ashbury for sure, who are obviously our labelling gurus. And Gary from Export Access, I don't know if you can hear me, Gary, but have you got, in terms of compliance, any experience of how straightforward or otherwise getting into Australia is?
Well, we've just had a message from Hera from Camden saying that they can help. So
I just saw that.
Hi there.
Yeah.
I'm happy to jump in if you don't mind.
Yeah, do.
I didn't want to interrupt. So yes, we can help with labeling, but what normally we see with UK manufactured products is just a matter of changing the design of the label. We don't really encounter much problems or complications with compliance of products, but of course it all depends on the nature of the product itself. But yes, we can absolutely help. We have experts for the Australian market.
thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Hera.
So Gary, were you going to comment?
Only along the same lines as Hera has just said, basically. With Australia, the principal kind of regulatory barrier is revolves around quarantine. As probably everybody knows, the Australian government is very concerned about ensuring that certain pests and plant infestations and everything else don't enter Australia. But as far as I'm aware, the quarantine side of things is something that they would look at every consignment, but they would look at any perhaps controversial types of things. I know that, for example, as with lots of markets, there are concerns on things like pallets as well. wood used in pallets and packaging under the ISPM convention, I think. But apart from quarantine and things like that, as Hera said, the main thing is the label. So and well, Hera and I know Ashbury and also we will offer services where we can check the label and basically tell companies if there are any compliance issues with the label, the ingredients, the packaging, or the products. So the label is the starting point, basically.
Thanks, Gary. I hope that's answered your question, Shirley. And so we now know that Maxwell Green, Max, has joined us from Food and Drink Federation, and Max and FDF have just completed the full year report on 2023's export performance. So I'd like to hand over to Max, who's going to take us through the highlights of the UK's performance last year. So welcome, Max.
Hi all.
I hope we're going to see you.
Yeah, I'm trying. I've never used Zoom before on this computer, and it's not liking my camera. So I might have to remain off. Sorry. I'm just also going to try and share my screen if that's okay.
Yes, please. If you can manage that.
Yeah, sorry, it's my first time on Zoom, so I'm just getting used to it all. Smashing. Are you guys able to see my screen now?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yes, which my screen said you've started. Here we are. We've got it. We've got it. I've got it. Has anybody else got it?
Yep.
Right.
Yes, I can see it.
You're on, Max. We can't see
Cool.
you, but we can see the numbers.
I mean, the numbers are the important part, right? So,
right.
Just a quick introduction. I'm Max Green. I work in the international trade negotiations team at the Food and Drink Federation. I'm also the person that produces these quarterly trade snapshots, which looks at everything trade related in food and drink. And as John rightly said, we just released R1 for the whole of 2023, which I'll just quickly run through with you guys. And if you have any questions, please just let myself know. So we launched this on Monday this week. And I think just to kind of go over some of the major trends that we're seeing, I think the number one kind of thing that we're seeing is quite a large, quite a big decline, especially in volume. So as you can see here, we've got quite a large decline in a lot of our major products here. And then when we compare this to pre-Brexit, pre-COVID as well, it is also quite a large decline. You can also see down here at the bottom, when we compare it to our 5-year average, by the end of the year, it kind of dropped off. We'd expect our average to be a lot higher. We'd expect 2023 to be a lot higher than our 5-year average due to inflationary pressures and things like that. But you can see we're kind of struggling at the end of the year. One good news story, I guess, is the EU trade is starting to increase, whereas previous years we've had a bigger increase in non-EU trade, especially in exports, but we're seeing EU markets starting to take a bigger share, which is the reverse of what we've seen. As you can see on the right-hand side, some large increases, especially to markets such as Ireland, Spain, Poland, Singapore, but also some large decreases. Canada, for example, Australia, quite the opposite of what you want to see after the first UK FTA came into force in May last year. Just checking you still see as I move through. You can see the import page.
Yep.
Yes, thanks.
Again, imports doing quite well across the board, really. Non-EU markets doing well as EU markets, and we're seeing that increasing EU proportion of imports as well. And Again, there's a few large declines here, especially from the Canadian market. You're all aware of the kind of issues we've had with that market, with exports and imports over the last year. So there's not really a big surprise there, but we are seeing an increased supply from abroad over the last few years. And then we put together this big map just to show in kind of a wider perspective of what's going on. You can see kind of Europe is the only market where we're doing well in exports. Well, when I say well, I mean steady. So kind of a 1.5% increase. But that does come with a caveat that even with this increase, when it looks at just volume, it's actually a decline. We can't get an overall volume for food and drink because a lot of the products are kind of, well, they're all measured slightly differently, so we can't compare it because it's like liters and kilograms and things like that. But when you look at it on a product by product basis, we're seeing quite a large decline into Europe. But it's the only market which looks positive in value terms, 1.5%. We use this report this year anyway to push some of our main messaging, especially around not the EU labeling. So it's quite a big concern for some of our members, and I'm sure you guys are also on that as well. But we're trying really hard to push some of the messaging out, and there are some good growth opportunities here. For example, I'll go on to next is our kind of section on Ireland. We're doing well, but the not the EU labeling policy being expanded to all of Great Britain can really affect this, and we put that in there a few times actually. And then there's also issues we put in around the border target operating model coming into effect this year, which would obviously harm our exports to this market. But in terms of Ireland, again, it's a similar story to the rest of it. That the value is kind of up on both exports and imports. But we're also seeing quite a decline in the volume exports. So as you can see there, quite a lot of red, which isn't nice to see, but a lot of different product categories not doing well. You'll see there that cereals is up. We have seen quite a large increase in cereal exports, and this is, we think, due to some supply chains kind of rerouting itself after or since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We do see a lot of big increase in cereal exports, especially to non-EU markets as well. We think, we're not 100% certain, we think a lot of cereal grains are coming into the UK and then being re-exported outwards since the Russian invasion. Nothing else really on Ireland, so I'll move on. Which is more interesting is the Australian page. The hope here was we'd see a large increase in exports since May of last year due to the FTA coming into force. Unfortunately, we have not really seen this, and so we've used this opportunity to push sort of our messaging around how government can offer better support for exporters, or they can include industry sooner. So I'm sure you're aware that last year they created a utilization team within the Department of Business and Trade. This was actually created after the deal came into force, which was disappointing. So we put some messaging in there around involve us sooner, and we can help you, and we can increase the awareness so people can use it. That being said, we have seen a few increases in certain product categories, one of them being ice cream for some bizarre reason. I'm not sure if they've got a new refrigerated freezer shipping load or something, but it's been increasing over the last year. And the major impact we've seen of this deal is actually on the import side. So we're getting a huge increase in things like sugar, rice, beef, those kind of things. But on this, we would like to kind of get a little bit of feedback on if members are using the Australia and the New Zealand FTAs, and if not, is there a reason for that? Is it around government guidance? Is it around kind of the fact that it's a market really far away and it's not going to impact or impact you too much, or is it just the EU is right there and other markets are much easier to go into? So we continue to push some of our support messaging and guidance messaging and make a guidance online which is much simpler and easier to use to the government and civil service. And then the last slide, we looked at Switzerland. So as many of you are aware, I think I want to say round 4 of the UK-Switzerland negotiations are due to take place at the moment, actually, in March. So we put this on there to try and remind government that we have some asks here. So as you can see, trade wasn't fantastic, and exports were down to the Swiss market, with a few exceptions in cheese and cereal, sorry, and wine. But we pushed on the fact that there are still very high tariff rates with Switzerland, even with a current FTA that we got through the EU. So we tried to put a few products down here in the bottom right of high tariff rates and, you know, relatively low export value because of these high tariff rates. And then we put in a few messaging around removal of tariffs on manufacturing equipment, labor, provisional labor, and things like that to push some more messaging out. But as you can see, kind of overall exports in most of these markets are struggling. We do expect, and I hope so, we do expect that 2024 may be slightly better, especially with the more uptake in the Australian FTA. But we're also aware that there are a lot of challenges that are upcoming. Things like the border target operating model, the Canadian loss of EU accumulation coming up on the 1st of April, the Red Sea crisis. So we will see what the next snapshot will bring us, which is due to be published 3 months' time, which would make that the start of June. But I'll stop there if you had any thoughts, views, or questions on some of the data.
Right, thanks very much, Max, for that quick run through this very detailed information you've got up in front of us. So anybody want to ask questions of Max?
Yes, please, Max. Has the government looked at any impact reports on the effect of vet inspections for meat products coming into the UK?
So that's something that we are discussing with the government, well, the civil service, and especially DEFRA at the moment. But currently, there are no, as I believe, there are no impact assessments. But I will follow up. I will follow up that one with you. That's not my area of expertise, but I will follow that up. But okay, I know that we are working closely, especially trying to get in stuff like veterinary agreements and stuff like that. So rest assured, we are on it. But we are seeing some friction
with this. A deadline, I think it's the end of April, and the lack of resources in terms of the number of vets, in terms of the areas where these inspections can take place, lack of refrigeration services available in case stuff needs to be taken off. It will, in my opinion, have a negative impact upon people's willingness to supply meat products or frozen products into the UK if we're seeing substantial delays. And I also think that will impact upon our ability to use trailers for export, availability of trailers to send British products via Dover Calais to the EU market. So I think there's potentially a double whammy there. And I think it's a bit of a disgrace that no impact report has been done, because the lack of preparation, it will directly impact the members of the Food and Drink Association.
Yeah, I will follow up with my colleague who works a bit closely on that for you. And I'm sure Nicola or John can share my email as well after this if you have any further questions, and I'll come back to you on that. And unfortunately, I'm not into kind of the border side of it, but I will make sure that someone gets back to you.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, Max. Thanks. Anybody else? Any questions for Max? Everybody's very silent this morning. I don't know what we've done to you.
I was
I
just
think
gonna
so. Just
Sorry,
I was
Max.
just going to say there's an open request that if there's any data here that you'd like to see a little bit more detail on, or anything at all, a product specific, a market, it takes literally 5 or 10 minutes for me to dive into it and get it for you. So if you have any requests, just send them over my way or to Nicola, and I can get that to you very quickly.
Are we allowed to share these details, Max, on the screen?
Details of what? Sorry.
Your presentation.
Yeah, so this is online, available to everyone. We send it to government, to civil service, so you can find it on our website, and under the trade policy. I can send a link to these. It's released every quarter, and you can see them all there.
Lovely, thank you.
Max
Just
has
put
put his,
the links in the chat to the report.
Yeah.
I've just popped that in there, and also your email, Max, is in there if
Great.
anybody wants to contact you direct.
Yeah, we can look at any. So if you have a really niche thing around certain chocolate products or certain cheese products, we can look even more detail than we have into a specific market. We've also released a regional report, which has a small section on exports, which looks at different regions of the UK and where they're exporting to. I will get a link to that, and put it in the chat in a minute. Obviously, there's some difficulties with that data, especially where headquarters are kind of positioned, but it does give a kind of overall overview of like what regions and what they're exporting where.
Max, when you said obviously the report goes off to different government departments and is widely circulated, is that kind of where it stops, or is there a forum, or do you get feedback on what's gone into the report? Because obviously you've made some really great recommendations which are of of interest to our members, but is there a forum or a sort of government answers back type of session or report at any point?
So we have different levels of success when we send these out. So, for example, our full-year trade snapshot usually gets a little bit more feedback from government. We get a lot of queries. Obviously, we try and time it with negotiations and political events and stuff. But it doesn't quite stop. I mean, we go through some media as well. So it was mentioned in the Times, I believe, this time round, and we pushed that to government just to show how, how just to kind of purvey those kind of messages. But it really depends on the report and what we're saying. We try and present it where we can. We push it off to all the relevant government departments. We get some feedback and some requests to go through it, but generally it's pretty low key.
Great, thank you.
right. Well, thanks very much, Max. Anybody else, any questions for Max? Well,
I think if I could just, sorry, if I could just jump in really quickly. We're also, so there's a few messaging here in this report that we've kind of mentioned. It would be good if there was any feedback on some certain things that we can kind of push to government. So, for example, the first one, exporting to Canada, as you can see here, one of our messaging is allow the continuity with the rules of origin requirement, which obviously it comes out of effect on the 1st of April, so we can no longer use EU inputs to gain preferential access on UK origin goods. We've done a bit of scoping and looked for our members, and we don't think there's going to be a massive impact of this. But if you have, if your business is going to see some impact of the loss of EU accumulation with Canada, it would be good to know. We are in constant talks with DEFRA and DBT on this, and the only issue we've so far raised is on the processed meat area and potentially in sweet biscuits as well, but we don't know of any other areas that could be impacted, looking at the kind of rules of origin text and stuff like that. So if there are any issues that you think will be faced, any sectors, subsectors that are going to be impacted. It'd be good to know that. And then just another request, I guess, we're working very closely with the Federation of Small Businesses, especially on export support. So we're talking very closely with the shadow labour team as well. We're producing a report on increasing or getting better government guidance and support for exporters. So far, our main asks are around kind of a more clear trade portal for exporters, better use of the DEFRA attaché network, getting some good contacts and some more clarity on what they do. A little bit on kind of DBT country staff and the fact they're not utilised very much because the government kind of hides their contact information away, and other things, and trying to link it towards, look at the Australian trade portal, for example. It's fantastic, and we don't have anything like that. So if there's any feedback on what government can be doing on export support and guidance, it'd be really useful to know, so we can push that in some of our FSB roundtables with the Labour government.
Max, that's very useful. Thank you very much indeed. If you could just stop sharing your screen for a moment,
gosh.
please, be helpful. I just wanted to raise yet again the issue of not for EU labelling, to remind everybody that the questionnaire, the consultation ends today. The questionnaire is a dreadful document. We've had comments on how difficult it is to fill in. There's still time to do it, because this is going to have a huge impact on our exports of certain products to the EU. We've written to the 3 secretaries of state involved. I was in touch with the shadow secretary of state at Department for Business and Trade. We're doing all we can. We're working with Max's colleagues at FDF, and we're making as much noise as possible. So please, everybody, if you're going to be impacted by this not for EU labelling, please get your response in before tonight.
We've also got our EU. We published our consultation on our website. I can check if that's accessible to non-members, but be happy to share that with definitely Nicola and John. So
thanks, Max. That's very useful. Thank you. Well,
thanks.
Well, thank you, Max, for your very valuable work on these statistics and your interpretation of them. So we've reached the end of our time, everybody. Thank you very much for attending. Sorry we've lost our other presenters. They've gone. So thanks, everybody, and see you again in 3 weeks' time.